For years, royal watchers believed that no matter how bad things became between Prince William and Prince Harry, there would eventually be a reconciliation. After all, they were brothers. Not just brothers, but two men who had experienced a childhood unlike anyone else in the world. They walked behind their mother's coffin together. They grew up under relentless public scrutiny together. They spent decades standing side by side, and for a long time, many people assumed that Bond could survive anything. But according to a growing number of royal commentators, something has changed. This is no longer being described as a temporary family disagreement. It's no longer being described as a misunderstanding, and it's no longer being viewed as a relationship that simply needs time to heal. Instead, some royal observers now believe Prince William has reached a point where he sees no path back, no trust, no reconciliation, no return. And according to those commentators, one factor sits at the center of everything: Meghan Markle. Now, to be clear, nobody outside the royal family knows exactly what conversations have taken place behind closed doors. But critics point to years of interviews, documentaries, public accusations, and deeply personal revelations that have left scars many believe may never fully disappear. Because from William's perspective, according to royal analysts, this wasn't just a family dispute. It became a public war. Private conversations became global headlines. Family disagreements became streaming content. Royal tensions became international entertainment. And critics argue that William has never forgiven that. What makes the situation even more dramatic is that the future king now occupies a very different position than he did when the conflict first began. Every year, William moves closer to the throne. Every year, his responsibilities grow larger. Every year, the monarchy's future becomes more closely tied to his leadership. And according to some commentators, that reality is changing how he views Harry altogether. The question is no longer whether the brothers can repair their relationship. The question is whether William even wants to. Because according to reports, palace insiders and royal observers increasingly describe a man who has stopped looking backward and started looking forward. A man focused on protecting the institution, protecting his family, and protecting the future of the monarchy, even if that means leaving his brother behind. But here's where the story becomes even more explosive. Because according to critics, William doesn't simply blame Harry for what happened. They believe he blames Meghan for changing Harry entirely, for turning a family conflict into a permanent divide, for creating a situation where trust became impossible. And if those critics are right, then the biggest obstacle to reconciliation isn't distance, it isn't time, and it isn't pride. It's the belief that the person William once knew no longer exists. Before we get to why some royal commentators believe William has completely closed the door on Harry, we need to go back to the moment many people believe everything started falling apart. Because according to those observers, that's when William first realized the damage might be permanent. According to many royal commentators, the breakdown between Prince William and Prince Harry didn't happen overnight. It wasn't one interview, it wasn't one argument, and it wasn't one decision. Instead, they believe it happened gradually. A slow erosion of trust that built up over years until the relationship became almost unrecognizable. In the early days, reports suggested William had concerns about how quickly Harry's relationship with Meghan Markle was progressing. According to accounts that later emerged, William allegedly encouraged his younger brother to slow down and take more time before making major life decisions. Supporters of Harry viewed that as interference. Supporters of William viewed it as concern. But regardless of which interpretation people accepted, many royal observers believe that moment marked the beginning of a much larger divide. Because from Harry's perspective, criticism of Meghan increasingly felt personal. And from William's perspective, concern for Harry increasingly felt unwelcome. Over time, those differences reportedly became harder to ignore. The brothers who once appeared inseparable began appearing together less frequently. Joint appearances became more formal. Body language became a topic of endless discussion. Every public interaction was analysed for signs of tension. At first, many people dismissed the rumours. After all, siblings argue. Families disagree. That alone wasn't shocking. What shocked observers was how quickly the situation seemed to escalate. According to royal commentators, the real turning point came when private disagreements began spilling into the public arena. Because once family tensions become public knowledge, everything changes. Every headline creates pressure. Every leak creates suspicion. Every news story raises questions about who can be trusted. And according to critics, trust became the biggest casualty of all. For William, the issue reportedly wasn't simply disagreement. It was loyalty. Royal analysts frequently point out that William spent his entire life being trained to protect the institution. Discretion wasn't optional. It was essential. Private conversations stayed private. Family matters stayed within the family. That was the culture he grew up in. So when increasingly personal details about royal life started appearing in interviews, documentaries and books, critics argue that William viewed those actions very differently than Harry did. While Harry may have seen them as telling his truth, commentators believe William saw them as betrayals. And according to some observers, that's when William allegedly stopped viewing the conflict as temporary, because disagreements can be repaired. Arguments can be forgiven, but broken trust is much harder to restore. Then came the interviews that made headlines around the world, the accusations, the revelations, the deeply personal stories. Each new disclosure generated global attention. Each new disclosure created fresh controversy. And according to royal commentators, each one pushed the brothers further apart. For critics of Harry and Meghan, these moments confirmed William's worst fears. They believe he saw every public revelation as proof that private family matters were no longer safe, that conversations could become headlines, that trust could no longer be assumed. Supporters of Harry strongly reject that interpretation. They argue Harry had every right to explain his experiences and defend himself publicly. But regardless of which side people support, one thing is difficult to deny. The relationship between the brothers never looked the same afterward. And according to many royal analysts, that's why the current situation feels so different from previous royal disputes. Because this isn't being described as anger anymore. It's being described as distance. A cold, deliberate distance, the kind that develops when someone stops expecting reconciliation. And according to those same commentators, the next chapter may explain why many people believe Meghan became the symbol of everything William feels went wrong. If you ask royal commentators why they believe reconciliation has become so difficult, many of them will point to one name: Meghan Markle. Now, to be clear, nobody outside the royal family knows exactly how Prince William feels. But according to critics and royal observers, Meghan became the symbol of a transformation they believe changed Harry forever. Before Meghan entered the picture, William and Harry were often viewed as a team. Different personalities, certainly. Different responsibilities, absolutely. But still a team. They shared a unique bond forged through experiences very few people could understand. For years, the public saw them standing together at major royal events, supporting the same causes and presenting a united front. That's why the change appeared so dramatic. According to critics, the moment Harry's priorities shifted entirely toward protecting Meghan, his relationship with William began moving in the opposite direction. Supporters of Harry argue that this is exactly what should happen. A husband is supposed to put his wife first. A marriage is supposed to become the primary relationship. From that perspective, Harry was simply doing what any committed husband would do. Critics, however, believe something much bigger happened. They argue that Meghan didn't simply become Harry's wife. She became the centre of a new worldview that increasingly put him at odds with his family. As disagreements intensified, William reportedly found himself not only disagreeing with Harry, but also struggling to understand the decisions Harry was making. Every interview, every documentary, every public criticism of the royal family, every accusation. According to commentators, William allegedly viewed these events through one lens: influence, the belief that Harry was becoming someone he no longer recognized. Whether that's fair or not remains a matter of debate. But the perception itself became powerful. And in royal families, perception often matters almost as much as reality. The situation grew even more complicated because Meghan herself became one of the most polarizing figures connected to the monarchy. Supporters viewed her as a woman who faced extraordinary pressure and unfair treatment. Critics viewed her as someone who created unnecessary conflict within the institution. Those completely opposite interpretations ensured that every new controversy became another battle. Every headline created more division. Every public appearance generated more debate. And, according to royal commentators, William eventually reached a point where he stopped focusing on individual incidents. Instead, he began focusing on the overall pattern. From his perspective, critics argue, the issue was no longer one interview or one accusation. It was years of tension, years of public criticism, years of family disagreements becoming global news. That's why some royal observers believe Meghan became the symbol of the entire conflict. Not necessarily because William blamed her for every problem, but because many of the events that damaged the relationship happened after she entered Harry's life. Fairly or unfairly, critics believe William now associates Meghan with the collapse of one of the most important relationships he ever had. And according to some analysts, that perception may be the single biggest obstacle standing in the way of reconciliation. Because it's one thing to forgive a brother. It's another thing entirely to welcome back the person you believe helped change him. Whether that belief is accurate is something only William truly knows. But according to commentators, it helps explain why the distance between the brothers appears greater today than ever before. And the next part of the story may be the most significant of all. Because many royal watchers now believe William isn't thinking about repairing the past anymore. He's thinking about protecting the future. And in that future, some observers believe Harry may no longer have a meaningful role at all. According to many royal commentators, the biggest change in this story isn't the anger between Prince William and Prince Harry. It's the absence of anger. Because anger suggests there is still emotion, still investment, still a desire to argue, explain, or fix things. But some royal observers now believe William has moved beyond that stage entirely. Instead of focusing on what was lost, they argue he has become focused on what lies ahead. And what lies ahead is the throne. Every year, William's responsibilities continue growing. Every year, he takes on a larger role within the monarchy. Every year, he moves closer to becoming king. According to royal analysts, that reality changes everything. Because the future king cannot afford to spend his time trapped in old family disputes. His focus has to be on the institution, the crown, the public, his wife and children, the future of the monarchy itself. Critics argue that this shift in priorities has fundamentally changed the way William views Harry. Years ago, Harry was his younger brother first and a royal second. Today, according to some commentators, William increasingly sees situations through the lens of leadership and responsibility. And from that perspective, they believe Harry represents uncertainty, a source of unpredictability, a source of headlines, a source of controversy. Whether that perception is fair is highly debated. But critics argue that perception is exactly what matters, because future kings are trained to think about stability above everything else. Then, there's another factor that royal watchers frequently mention: time. When the conflict first began, many people assumed reconciliation was inevitable. Months would pass, emotions would cool, the brothers would reconnect, the family would heal. But that's not what happened. Instead, years passed. More interviews happened. More accusations surfaced. More books were published. More private details entered the public domain. And according to commentators, every passing year made reconciliation more difficult. Not easier, the distance became normal, the separation became routine, the absence became expected. For William, critics argue, life continued moving forward. He focused on royal duties. He focused on Catherine. He focused on raising Prince George, Princess Charlotte, Prince Louis. He focused on preparing for a future role unlike any other. And during that process, some observers believe Harry gradually became less central to William's daily life. That's why many royal commentators now describe the relationship differently than they did a few years ago. They no longer talk about repairing a damaged bond. They talk about a bond that may no longer exist in any meaningful form, a painful reality for many people who remember the brothers during happier times. The two young princes laughing together, supporting one another, appearing inseparable. That image remains powerful, but according to critics, it may no longer reflect reality. Because while the public continues hoping for a reunion, William appears focused on something else entirely: the future. And according to some analysts, that future may have very little room for Harry. Not because William hates him, not because William wants revenge, but because he may have reached a conclusion that many people struggle to accept, that some relationships simply cannot return to what they once were. And if that's true, then the next question becomes even more dramatic. What happens when William finally becomes king? Because according to royal commentators, that moment could permanently define Harry's place within the royal story. And some believe the answer is already becoming clear. For decades, one assumption followed Prince Harry wherever he went. No matter what happened, he would always be part of the monarchy. He would always be a prince, always be a member of the royal family, always have a place somewhere within the institution. But according to a growing number of royal commentators, that assumption may no longer be true in the way people once imagined. Not because Harry has lost his title, not because he has been formally removed from the family, but because his practical role within the monarchy may already be finished. According to critics, the evidence is difficult to ignore. Harry is no longer a working royal. He no longer represents the crown at official events. He no longer participates in most royal engagements. And perhaps most importantly, he no longer appears connected to the long-term future William is building. For many royal observers, that's the real story. Not what Harry has lost, but what William is creating without him. Look at the future of the monarchy today. At the centre are King Charles, Prince William, and Princess Catherine. Behind them stand the next generation: Prince George, Princess Charlotte, Prince Louis. The royal institution is increasingly focused on a smaller group of senior royals, a streamlined monarchy, a concentrated leadership structure, and according to analysts, Harry simply isn't part of that vision anymore. Years ago, people assumed he would always play a significant role: the loyal brother, the trusted advisor, the experienced royal supporting the future king. Today, critics argue that role has effectively disappeared. Not through one dramatic decision, but through years of separation, years of distance, years of living completely different lives. The situation becomes even more significant when commentators discuss trust. Because according to many royal analysts, future kings don't just rely on family. They rely on trusted family, people they know will protect private conversations, protect internal discussions, protect the institution itself. And critics argue that after years of public interviews, documentaries, and revelations, William may no longer view Harry through that lens. Again, nobody outside the family knows exactly how William feels, but royal commentators frequently return to the same conclusion. Trust, once broken, is incredibly difficult to rebuild, especially at the highest levels of the monarchy. That's why some observers believe William has already adjusted to a future where Harry has no meaningful role, a future where official royal business continues without him, a future where important decisions are made without him, a future where the monarchy moves forward while Harry remains outside looking in. For supporters of Harry, that interpretation feels harsh. They argue that family bonds should matter more than institutional concerns, that brothers should eventually find a way back to one another, that reconciliation is always possible. But critics respond with a difficult question. What happens when one brother believes the other has repeatedly damaged the institution he's preparing to lead? For William, according to analysts, that question may outweigh every emotional argument. Because future kings are trained to think long-term, to protect stability, to avoid risk. And if William truly views Harry as a risk, then the consequences could be enormous. Which brings us to the most explosive part of this entire story. Because according to some royal watchers, the issue isn't whether Harry can return to royal life. They believe William has already decided that question. The real issue is whether William has emotionally closed the door as well. And if he has, then reconciliation may be far more distant than anyone realizes. If there is one reason royal commentators have become increasingly pessimistic about a reconciliation between Prince William and Prince Harry, it is this. They believe William may have stopped waiting. For years, public discussion centered around the idea that the brothers would eventually repair their relationship. After all, royal history is filled with family disagreements. Arguments happen, tensions rise, time passes, and eventually people find common ground. But according to many royal observers, the current situation feels different. Not because the conflict was bigger, but because it lasted longer. Every year that passes without meaningful reconciliation makes the divide feel more permanent. Every year creates new realities, new routines, new priorities, new lives. And according to critics, William has spent those years building a future that no longer depends on Harry being part of it. That's why some commentators believe the door has already been closed. Not publicly, not officially, but emotionally. Because there comes a point in some relationships where people stop expecting things to improve. They stop planning for reconciliation. They stop imagining a return to the way things once were. Instead, they adapt. And according to critics, William appears to have adapted. Look at how different his life is today. He is no longer simply the older brother in a famous family. He is the future king, the central figure in the monarchy's next chapter. His responsibilities continue growing, his public role continues expanding, and his focus appears increasingly centered on protecting the institution he will eventually lead. Royal analysts argue that this mindset changes everything, because from William's perspective, the issue may no longer be about forgiveness. It may be about trust, and trust is much harder to restore than affection. Someone can still love a family member and no longer trust them. Someone can still care about a relative while deciding they cannot play an important role in their future. That's the distinction many commentators believe is now defining William's relationship with Harry. Not hatred, not anger, distance, deliberate distance, the kind of distance created when expectations disappear. Some royal watchers point to public events as evidence. Funerals, coronations, major royal gatherings, moments where the brothers found themselves in the same places but appeared worlds apart. Supporters of Harry argue that people often read too much into photographs and body language. Critics counter that years of separation speak louder than any photograph ever could. And that's why the speculation continues, because the public keeps looking for signs of reconciliation. While commentators increasingly believe William has stopped looking altogether. Perhaps the most telling detail is that discussions about a reunion now feel very different than they once did. Years ago, people asked when reconciliation would happen. Today, many people ask whether it will happen at all. That shift is significant because it reflects a growing belief that the relationship may have moved beyond repair. Not impossible to fix, but increasingly unlikely. And according to some analysts, one person sits at the center of William's concerns every time the possibility of reconciliations is discussed: Meghan Markle. Because even if William and Harry wanted to rebuild their relationship, critics argue the larger issues surrounding trust, loyalty, and the events of the past few years would still remain. That's why many royal observers believe the final chapter of this story may not be about reconciliation. It may be about acceptance. Acceptance that the relationship has changed permanently. Acceptance that the future will look different than the past. And acceptance that some wounds never fully heal. But if that's true, then one final question remains. What happens when William finally becomes king? Because according to royal commentators, that moment may reveal whether Harry truly has any path back at all. According to many royal commentators, everything ultimately comes back to one moment: the day Prince William becomes king. Because while today's disagreements are viewed through the lens of family conflict, many observers believe the stakes will change completely once William ascends to the throne. At that point, he won't simply be Harry's older brother. He will be the monarch, the head of the institution, the person responsible for protecting the future of the crown. And according to critics, that responsibility could permanently shape how he handles his relationship with Harry. For years, people assumed there would always be a path back, a family gathering, a private conversation, a reconciliation behind closed doors. But royal analysts increasingly argue that William's future role makes those scenarios far more complicated, because kings are expected to prioritize stability above emotion, duty above personal feelings, the institution above individual relationships. And according to commentators, William has spent his entire life preparing for exactly that responsibility. That's why some observers believe the Harry situation is no longer being viewed as a family matter. They believe it's being viewed as an institutional matter, a question of trust, a question of risk, a question of what is best for the monarchy's future. Whether that perception is accurate is impossible to know from the outside. But it's a theory that continues gaining traction among royal watchers. Critics argue that William has likely reached a conclusion that many people find difficult to accept, that the monarchy can function perfectly well without Harry. In fact, they believe the monarchy has already been proving that for years. The institution continues operating. Royal engagements continue. Public support continues. Future plans continue, and Harry remains absent from most of it. According to commentators, every year that passes reinforces the same reality. The royal family has adapted to life without him, and William has as well. That may be the most painful part of the story for people who remember the brothers during happier times. Because there was a period when many believed William and Harry would spend their lives working side by side. The future king and his most trusted supporter, a partnership built on shared experiences and lifelong loyalty. Instead, critics argue the brothers now represent two completely different worlds, one inside the monarchy, one outside it, one focused on preserving the institution, one focused on building a life beyond it. And according to some royal observers, those worlds continue moving further apart every year. Then there's the issue of Meghan. Because for critics who believe she played a major role in the divide, reconciliation becomes even more difficult to imagine. It's not just about rebuilding trust between William and Harry. It's about rebuilding trust across an entire family network affected by years of public controversy. According to commentators, that's a challenge far greater than most people realize. And that's why many royal analysts have become increasingly skeptical that a dramatic reunion is coming, not because reconciliation is impossible, but because too much time has passed, too much has happened, too many lines have been crossed, at least in their view. Supporters of Harry reject that conclusion entirely. They argue that family bonds can survive extraordinary circumstances, that brothers can find their way back to one another, that healing remains possible no matter how difficult things become. And perhaps they're right. History is full of relationships that seemed beyond repair until they weren't. But as things stand today, many royal commentators see a very different picture. A future king moving forward, a younger brother living a separate life, and a divide that appears wider than ever before. For years, the public has waited for a reconciliation, a meeting, a conversation, a moment that would finally bring William and Harry back together. But according to many royal commentators, that moment feels further away today than ever before. Some believe William has already moved on. Some believe Harry still hopes for reconciliation. Others believe the damage is simply too great. The truth is that nobody outside the royal family knows what happens behind closed doors. Nobody knows what conversations have taken place. Nobody knows what the future holds. But one thing is certain. The relationship that once defined a generation of royals no longer looks the same. And as William moves closer to the throne, the questions surrounding Harry's place in the royal story only become more significant. Will the brothers eventually reunite? Will time heal old wounds? Or has the future king already accepted a future without Harry in it? Only time will reveal the answer. Until then, the world will keep watching, because some royal stories end with reconciliation, and some become legends of what might have been. What do you think? Is there still hope for William and Harry? Or has the divide become permanent? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more royal news, royal drama, and the stories everyone is talking about.